Hi, I'm Kylee Zempel, assistant editor at The Federalist, and today we're going to talk about the Wisconsin election. Now, Wisconsin's a very important state, not only because we have the best cheese, of course, but because we're a swing state, so you never know what's going to happen in a Wisconsin election. The only thing that you can predict is that the mainstream media will always do Democrats' bidding, and last week's spring primary was no exception. Now, if you've been reading the headlines or listening to the mainstream media, you've likely heard that Republicans and conservative members of the court did everything in their power to suppress voters and keep the Wisconsin election from being postponed. The mainstream media will also tell you that despite all of these efforts, it backfired, because at the end of the day, liberal Judge Jill Karofsky was elected to the Wisconsin State Supreme Court in place of incumbent conservative Justice Daniel Kelly. But maybe instead of these efforts backfiring, the reason that the left won the Supreme Court election was because there really was no malfeasance on the part of the GOP. And in fact, the evidence suggests that there was actually some pretty shady moves by Democrats to suppress voters in the state. You can read all about that in my piece over at The Federalist that was published about the mainstream media and the Democrats and their voter suppression techniques. But one thing that is very important to understand is the timeline, and the mainstream media is being very dishonest about it. They'll tell you that it's the Republicans' fault, that the election wasn't postponed, that Democratic Governor Tony Evers tried to postpone the election, and conservative judges struck it down in the court after Republican lawmakers refused to work with the governor. But what the media doesn't spend a lot of time on is the fact that in the weeks leading up to the election, Tony Evers was very consistent in saying that he wasn't going to postpone the election. Even as other states were postponing their primaries and spring elections, Tony Evers said that the election would be on April 7th, bottom line. And it wasn't until days before the election that he finally called on state lawmakers to postpone it, which of course at that point it was far too late to do so they didn't postpone it. And then the day before the election, less than 24 hours before polls were supposed to open, he issued an executive order, which he had already said would be an illegal maneuver. So he was really just setting it up to be struck down in the courts. So of course, this was all a Democratic messaging campaign, and at the end of the day, they won the messaging war because the mainstream media could pin it on the GOP and on conservative judges and say, look, the GOP made voters choose between their health or their constitutional right to vote. So go over and check out my piece at The Federalist. And in the meantime, don't believe everything you read in the headlines. I'm Kylee Zempel. Stay safe.